Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilman is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are my 5 ways to fix the card Corridor Creeper. Now, the first thing you should ask is, why does Corridor Creeper need fixed? And frankly, the card right now is just a little bit too good. If you look at the data, Corridor Creeper shows up in over 40% of Hearthstone decks right now. That is completely absurd. That is higher even than a card like Bone Mare was appearing in decks in the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta. And Bone Mare, of course, was considered one of the most popular, most dominant cards ever in Hearthstone. And it seems like right now Corridor Creeper is trumping even Bone Mare in regards to popularity and strength. And the reason for that really is that Corridor Creeper is, of course, fantastic in aggressive decks that are trading off early game minions all the time with things like patches, but frankly, Corridor Creeper is also good in control decks to counter those same kinds of styles and to serve as a great minion to follow up after board clears. So pretty much everybody in one way or another can find a way to use Corridor Creeper, and that's not always the best thing for Hearthstone, right? Basically, every deck either feels like they have to run Corridor Creeper or they have to tech against Corridor Creeper. And when the meta is that narrowly defined by a single card, that can really constrict the kinds of decks people are able to play, can reduce the fun because you're seeing the same card over and over again all the time. It's just not a healthy way to be in Hearthstone. You want different cards, different kinds of decks, different experiences as you're on the ladder, and Corridor Creeper is basically limiting all of that because it's just so darn good. So essentially here in this video, I'm going to present 5 ways I think we could very subtly tweak the card. Some might call them nerfs because they are kind of nerfs, making it just a little bit weaker so that it still sees play in the right kinds of decks and environments, and it's still something that can be good, because it's okay for cards to be good. It's just not okay for cards to be quite this good, in my opinion. So I don't want to totally kill the card or break the card. I think it's fine that it exists, but I think it should only work in a little bit smaller sample of decks, or maybe decks that can utilize specifically more powerfully zero-cost cards or beast cards, those sorts of things. So it's not quite so synonymous with the Hearthstone ladder right now. All that said, let's go ahead and jump into these 5 fixes. Up first, we have a pretty simple one, and one I think that would be the most likely for Blizzard to actually follow if they were going to nerf this card, which is just bumping up its mana cost. Blizzard loves to do that because it's a super lazy change that keeps the card identifiable and recognizable to people, but it still obviously makes it a little bit harder to play. So here in this fix, I basically take it from a 7 mana card to a 9 mana card. Now, clearly we could have gone to 8 mana, but in my opinion, 9 mana was just a little bit safer. It makes this come down basically just a turn or two later than it does now. It makes it a little bit harder to get it down to 0. It might be the kind of thing that makes it forced to being played at like 2 or 3 mana instead of 0 mana. So I think increasing it by 2 is the right amount. Essentially, sometimes it's, you often overkill your Corridor Creepers and they would be -2 or -3 mana if you were always reducing it. So 2 makes it just a sure thing that it's actually still going to slow it down a little bit in certain decks and matchups. So essentially just, it's still good. It still can come down for free. It doesn't change that aspect of it. It just happens a little bit later, so it's a little less swingy. And the first person to hit the Corridor Creeper early in the game doesn't just automatically win because they hit their Corridor Creeper first or got lucky with it. It also, of course, makes it slightly more challenging to play multiple Corridor Creepers in a turn because they're not both. Basically, if you have 2 of them, that's 4 additional mana you have to find because the nerf essentially gets doubled. So all of that just limits the potential for this thing to come down super fast, super early, and win games outright, which I think would be a fantastic change for this card. So moving on to the next fix, this is another subtle one. You might not even notice what it is right away, but it's essentially adding 1 word into the card's effect, which is making it only reduce its cost when friendly minions die, as opposed to all minions. So it basically cuts the cost reduction for Corridor Creeper in half in a lot of ways, and in fact makes it only good when you're trading stuff in. So it really limits the applications of when this card becomes good, or alternatively, it becomes good when your opponent has cleared your board. So instead of sort of a double down card that you play alongside a giant board of stuff and you just completely hammer your opponent to death with bodies and stats, Corridor Creeper could become more of a backup card, sort of a reload card, where if your opponent clears your board, then it becomes really powerful. And it's already like that sometimes a little bit, right? Because often it gets big cost reduction chunks when your opponent plays that Hellfire or Defile. That's when your Corridor Creeper gets cheapest. So this would maintain that in a lot of ways. In control matchups, Corridor Creeper might not even look all that different if your opponent isn't playing a lot of minions. But in those aggro v aggro matchups where everybody's trading in all the patches and all the tiny little bodies, Corridor Creepers become less influential because they, again, take a couple extra turns to actually come out. So they don't swing the game and win the game super early. So this just keeps it good as an answer to control, but limits its potential as just a swing instant win card in aggro matchups, and I think that's a much healthier way for Corridor Creeper to exist. Moving on to my third change, this is another simple one. Nice little elegant change, which is just reducing Corridor Creeper's health from 5 down to 3. And obviously, this just makes the Corridor Creeper a lot easier to kill. So right now, that 5/5 body, it's aggressively statted for attacking. It can do a ton of damage. It can also make a lot of value trades with that 5 health total. So it becomes the kind of thing that if you get it out on time, it can just help you cement a board lead and just snowball out of control. But if you reduce the health to 3, suddenly it becomes more of sort of a face game plan as opposed to a board presence, board value game plan. So it's a little bit harder to utilize the Corridor Creeper to snowball because it risks dying so much more easily. On top of that, of course, it also becomes much easier for your opponent to kill the Corridor Creeper. So if a control deck is looking for a way to answer this thing, suddenly they have that. So this clearly makes the Corridor Creeper a riskier play, a less rewarding play. It doesn't work in quite as many scenarios or board states. And I think that putting some cap on its potential or some cap on the scenarios that it does work makes the card feel a lot better, a lot riskier to play, so it's a much healthier risk-reward balance than currently exists, because there's basically no risk at all to running the Corridor Creeper. It's just a free 5/5. This brings things a little bit more in line with other cards, other expected effects and expected stats for, a 0-cost card, 3 health, feels much more reasonable and manageable for the opponent and puts you at risk. So I would love to just see a slight nerf to the health, would make Corridor Creeper feel 1,000 times better. So moving on to my fourth change here, we have another one that's a pretty simple change, which I think is good because Blizzard tends to design things pretty simply when they make nerfs. This time around, everything stays the same, but Corridor Creeper's cost reduction is limited to 2 mana, so it can never go down to 0 mana. It can only get down to 2 mana. And that's pretty tough for this card. Like, this might actually be the biggest nerf, but at the end of the day, a 2 mana 5/5 is still a pretty fantastic play, and a lot of decks could still use that. So I think Corridor Creeper would still see some play, it just wouldn't be nearly as powerful. Again, it'd be much better at limiting double Corridor Creepers. That'd be great. It would limit the swing potential of the card because you would not be able to do as many things alongside your Corridor Creeper. And let's be honest, everybody knows if you play Corridor Creeper, sometimes you gotta play it for 2 or 3 or 4 mana just to fill out your curve and play those bodies. So a lot of the times it wouldn't feel that much worse than it feels now when you're already playing it for 2 and 3 mana. It just limits those ridiculous moments where you drop double Corridor Creepers for 0 alongside a Call to Arms or some other ridiculous sort of play. So it caps out the really high roll potential of Corridor Creeper, making it feel much more consistent and predictable and controllable for your opponents, and honestly just making it feel a ton better on top of that. And then finally here for my last change, this one's kind of funny. It's not something Blizzard would ever do, but I think it is something which would really make Corridor Creeper feel good. And that is simply making it a legendary card. That's right, this card has no other changes. I just gave it a legendary gem and renamed it to the Sleeper because, of course, Corridor Creeper was the sleeper hit from Kobolds and Catacombs, and we all know the copy pasta for Corridor Creeper. So just call it the Sleeper, make it a legendary, don't change anything else. That way you can only run 1 Corridor Creeper in your deck. So that does 2 things, essentially. Like I've talked about in past fixes, it prevents those turns where you dump both Corridor Creepers and just absolutely dominate the game, but it also makes it so the Corridor Creeper's a less consistent draw. So you're not getting it in your early hand as often and able to swing as early as you do in most games. Turn 2, turn 3 Corridor Creepers are just so strong. This would reduce the likelihood that happened. Wouldn't feel nearly so bad to play against. You'd only need 1 answer to an early Creeper, which a lot of decks can manage. It's those multiple Creepers in a row that become more and more problematic. So just, only allow 1 to be in your deck, and a card of this power level honestly almost deserves legendary status anyway. Legendaries are supposed to be great and unique and powerful, and frankly, Corridor Creeper kind of feels like a legendary card in that way. It's so powerful and so influential and so game-winning when you play it that it might as well be a legendary anyway. So just make this thing the sleeper. Blizzard would never do that, obviously, but I think it'd be a pretty cool change to see. And there you go. Those are my 5 fixes for Corridor Creeper, guys. I'm curious what you think. First off, do you think Corridor Creeper really needs to be nerfed at all? I want to hear your thoughts there. Secondly, which of these changes do you like the best? If you hate all of these changes, you think I'm a moron and they're terrible, share what you think would be some good fixes. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. How would you change this card? How would you make it balanced? How would you prevent it from completely being demolished, as Blizzard tends to do when they nerf a card? They usually nerf them into oblivion, and we never see them again. That was not my goal with these changes. I wanted it to remain playable, just a little bit limited in how much it could accomplish. So I'm curious if you guys think I actually pulled that off or not. So leave your thoughts in the comments below, but until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.